The air was thick with the scent of lavender and tension as I sat on the worn leather couch in my in-laws' living room. The ornate grandfather clock in the corner ticked away the seconds with agonizing slowness, each tick echoing in my chest. My palms rested on my knees, but my fists were clenched, nails biting into my skin. Across the room, my wife Clara sat in silence, her head hung low. Her parents, Margaret and Gerald, stood near the fireplace, their expressions carved from stone. They looked at her with a mixture of disbelief, hurt, and something else, something colder, harsher. Disappointment. I had been invited here under the pretense of a family meeting. I hadn't known what to expect, but I never imagined this. A reckoning of sorts, orchestrated not by me, but by Clara's own parents. The betrayal that had been festering in the shadows was now dragged into the light, its raw edges exposed for all to see. "Clara," Margaret began, her voice trembling but resolute, "I don't know where to begin. How could you do this? How could you betray not only David but us, your family?" Clara flinched, her shoulders hunching as though the words themselves had struck her. She didn't respond. She hadn't said much since we arrived. The weight of her parents' accusations, and the truth they carried, seemed to have robbed her of speech. I stayed silent too, unsure of my place in this unfolding drama. This wasn't my doing. I hadn't uncovered her infidelity. That grim honor belonged to Margaret, who had stumbled upon the truth by sheer accident. A misplaced phone left unlocked on a kitchen counter during a recent visit. Texts, photos, and even voice messages between Clara and a man named Eric had painted. A vivid and damning picture. At first, Margaret hadn't believed it. She had called Gerald over, and together they had sifted through the evidence, hoping against hope that there was some other explanation. But there wasn't. The truth was undeniable. "I raised you better than this," Gerald said now, his voice low but edged with steel. "We taught you about loyalty, about respect, about honor. And this—" He gestured vaguely toward me, as if I were the physical embodiment of Clara's betrayal. "This is how you repay those lessons?" Clara finally lifted her head, her eyes red-rimmed and glassy. "Dad, Mom, please. I know I made a mistake. I know I hurt David. But I don't need you both to pile on—" "A mistake?" Margaret cut in, her voice rising. "A mistake is forgetting an anniversary or saying something hurtful in an argument. This wasn't a mistake, Clara. This was a choice. A deliberate, selfish choice." Her words hung in the air like a guillotine blade, sharp and final. Clara's face crumpled, and she buried her head in her hands, her shoulders shaking with silent sobs. I should have felt something. Vindication, perhaps, or at least a sliver of satisfaction. But I didn't. Watching her crumble under the weight of her parents' scorn only deepened the ache in my chest. She had betrayed me, yes, but she was still the woman I had once loved, the woman I had built a life with. And now that life was in ruins. Margaret turned to me then, her expression softening. "David," she said, "I can't even begin to imagine how you must feel, but I want you to know that Gerald and I are on your side. We love you like a son, and we are so sorry for what Clara has done." I nodded, swallowing the lump in my throat. "Thank you," I managed to say, though the words felt hollow. What did their support matter now, when my marriage was a shattered vase, its pieces too jagged to fit back together? Margaret turned, back to Clara, her face hardening once more. "You've brought shame to this family," she said. "You've hurt a good man, someone who has loved and supported you through everything. And for what? For some fling with a man who doesn't care about you the way David does?" Clara's sobs grew louder, but Margaret pressed on. "I don't know if I can forgive this, Clara, and honestly, I'm not sure I want to." Gerald stepped forward, his gaze steely. If you think you can come crawling back to us when this all falls apart, you're mistaken. You've made your bed, Clara. Now you have to lie in it." I blinked, startled. Was he disowning her? Clara seemed to realize it too. Her head shot up, her tear-streaked face a mask of panic. "Dad, no! You don't mean that! You can't mean that!" "We can, and we do," Gerald said, his voice cold. "You've shown us who you really are, Clara, and we can't condone it. Not as your parents, and not as people who care about David." Margaret nodded in agreement. "We love you, Clara, but love doesn't mean enabling your mistakes. You need to face the consequences of your actions." The room fell into a heavy silence, the only sound Clara's ragged breathing. My mind was a whirlwind of emotions: anger, sadness, confusion, and a faint, flickering sense of relief. The days that followed that fateful confrontation were surreal. The memory of Clara's parents disowning her played in my mind like a broken record, their cold, resolute voices echoing through the silence of our now empty home. Clara had stayed at her sister's house after the meeting, and I hadn't heard from her since. Part of me wondered if she even wanted to reach out, or if she was too ashamed to face me. The solitude gave me space to think, though the thoughts weren't always kind. I cycled between anger and sorrow, relief and guilt, sometimes within the span of a single hour. I had spent years building a life with Clara, planning a future, sharing dreams, and weathering storms together. And now, that life felt like a ghost haunting me in every corner of the house. One afternoon, as I sat on the back porch nursing a cup of coffee that had long gone cold, my phone buzzed on the table beside me. I glanced at the screen. Clara. My chest tightened, a mix of emotions rising to the surface. After a moment's hesitation, I answered. "David," she said, her voice trembling. "Can we talk?" I exhaled slowly, pressing my fingers to my temple. "What is there to talk about, Clara? Everything's already been said." "Please," she pleaded. I need to explain. I need you to understand." I wanted to tell her that I didn't need an explanation, that no amount of words could justify what she'd done, but against my better judgment, I found myself saying, "Fine, come over." She arrived an hour later, looking as though she hadn't slept in days. Her hair was unkempt, her clothes wrinkled, and her eyes were rimmed with dark circles. It was a stark contrast to the Clara I once knew, the woman who took pride in her appearance, who carried herself with effortless grace. Seeing her like this stirred something in me, though I couldn't quite tell if it was pity, anger, or both. We sat across from each other in the living room, the coffee table a chasm between us. For a while, neither of us spoke. Clara fidgeted, with the hem of her sweater avoiding my gaze. Finally, she broke the silence. "I'm sorry, David, for everything. I know I hurt you in ways I can't ever take back." I nodded, keeping my expression neutral. "You did." Her eyes glistened, with tears, but she pressed on. "I made a terrible mistake. No, it was more than a mistake. It was a betrayal, and I hate myself for it. But I need you to know, it wasn't about you. It wasn't because you weren't enough." I scoffed, leaning back in my chair. "Then, what was it, Clara? Because from where I'm sitting, it sure as hell felt like I wasn't enough." She winced, tears spilling down her cheeks. "It was me, David. I was the problem. I was insecure, restless, and stupid enough to think that someone else could fill the void I felt inside. But they couldn't. And now I've lost everything. My husband, my parents, my dignity. I don't deserve forgiveness, but I still needed to say it." Her words hung in the air, heavy and raw. I wanted to lash out, to tell her that her apology didn't change anything, that the damage was already done. But a part of me, perhaps the part that once loved her so deeply, could see the truth in her eyes. She was broken, Not just by what she had done, but by the realization of what it had cost her. "I don't know if I can forgive you," I said finally, my voice low. "And even if I could, I don't know if I'd want to." She nodded, tears falling freely now. "I understand." We sat in silence for a while after that, the weight of our shared pain filling the room. When she finally rose to leave, she paused at the door, her hand lingering on the frame. "For what it's worth," she said, her voice barely above a whisper, "I'll spend the rest of my life trying to make up for what I did, even if you never want to see me again." And then she was gone, leaving me alone once more. But this time, the solitude felt different, less like a punishment and more like a chance to start anew. In the weeks that followed, I began to piece my life back together. I leaned on friends and family, found solace in small routines, and even started therapy to process the whirlwind of emotions I was carrying. It wasn't easy, and there were days when the pain felt insurmountable. But slowly, I began to see a path forward. As for Clara, I heard through the grapevine that she was working to rebuild her own life, though her relationship with her parents remained strained. Whether she found the redemption she sought, I couldn't say. But I knew that I couldn't let her choices define my future. My story was still being written, and for the first time in a long while, I felt hopeful about what the next chapter might hold. Months passed, and the seasons shifted as if marking the passage of time in my recovery. The house felt different now, not as empty, but as though it had been cleansed of old ghosts. I'd rearranged the furniture, repainted the walls, and filled the spaces with things that brought me comfort. New books, a couple of paintings, and even a dog, a golden retriever I named Scout. His boundless energy and wagging tail brought life to a home that once felt steeped in sorrow. Therapy became a cornerstone of my healing. My therapist, Dr. Monroe, helped me unpack the layers of betrayal, anger, and self-doubt that Clara's affair had left behind. She guided me toward understanding that my worth wasn't tied to her choices, and that my future didn't have to carry the shadow of her actions. "You're not just moving on," Dr. Monroe said one session, her kind eyes steady on mine. "You're rediscovering who you are without the weight of betrayal. That's a powerful thing." Her words stayed with me as I began to rebuild my life. I threw myself into work, taking on new challenges and projects that reignited my passion for what I did. I reconnected with old friends, sharing laughter over beers and late-night conversations that reminded me of who I was before everything fell apart. One evening, as I sat on the back porch with Scout at my feet, my phone buzzed with an unexpected text. It was from Clara's mother, Irene. "I hope you're doing well, David. I wanted to thank you for how you handled everything. You showed grace when most wouldn't have. I don't know if Clara's told you, but she's been going to therapy, too. She's trying to change. I thought you'd want to know." I stared at the screen, a flurry of emotions swirling within me. Irene's message was kind, but it reopened wounds I thought were beginning to heal. Clara's efforts at redemption weren't something I'd thought much about. I'd been so focused on moving forward that I hadn't stopped to wonder what her path might look like. I typed out a quick response. "Thank you, Irene. I appreciate you reaching out. I hope she finds the peace she's looking for." And that was that. Or so I thought. A week later, I ran into Clara at a coffee shop downtown. It was purely by chance. She was sitting by the window, a book in hand and a cup of tea in front of her. She looked up as I entered, her eyes widening in surprise. For a moment, neither of us moved. Then she offered a tentative smile, and against all logic, I found myself walking over to her table. "Hi, David," she said softly, her voice carrying a mix of hesitation and warmth. "Clara," I replied, nodding in acknowledgement. "It's been a while." "It has," she agreed, gesturing to the empty seat across from her. "Would you like to sit?" I hesitated, my mind racing, but something, curiosity perhaps, or closure, compelled me to take the seat. The conversation that followed was unexpected. Clara spoke of her therapy sessions, the painful truths she'd confronted, and the steps she was taking to become a better person. "I don't expect you to forgive me," she said, her eyes glistening with unshed tears. "I know, I don't deserve that, but I wanted you to know that I'm trying to be better. Not for anyone else, but for myself." Her words were sincere, and for the first time I saw a glimmer of the woman I had fallen in love with all those years ago. It didn't erase the pain she'd caused, but it made me realize something important. Holding on to resentment would only keep me tethered to the past. "I'm glad you're working on yourself," I said finally, my voice steady. "I hope it brings you the peace you're looking for." We parted ways after that, and though the encounter left me feeling a little unsteady, it also brought a sense of closure I hadn't realized I needed. Clara's journey was her own, just as mine was mine. And for the first time in a long while, I felt free. As I walked out of the coffee shop, the crisp autumn air filled my lungs and I smiled. Life was unpredictable, messy, and often painful, but it was also full of possibilities, and I was ready to embrace them one step at a time. Months turned into a year, and my life continued to evolve. I had learned to embrace the small joys: morning walks with Scout, the smell of freshly brewed coffee, the way sunlight streamed through the kitchen window in the early hours. It was in these ordinary moments that I found extraordinary peace. One day, while working on a project at my new office, my phone buzzed. It was a message from Emma, an old friend I hadn't spoken to in years. She was someone I'd known from college, bright, ambitious, and full of life. We'd lost touch after graduation, but the message felt like a bridge to a simpler, happier time. Emma: "Hey David, long time no see. I just moved back to town and found out we're practically neighbors. Want to catch up over coffee sometime?" I smiled, feeling a warmth that had been absent for far too long. Emma had always been a breath of fresh air, and the idea of reconnecting with someone who knew me before life became so complicated was appealing. I replied quickly, "Absolutely. Let me know when and where." We met at a small cafe nestled in the heart of the city. Emma was just as I remembered, her laugh infectious, her energy magnetic. We spent hours reminiscing about our college days, swapping stories and catching up on everything we'd missed in each other's lives. "What about you, David?" she asked, leaning forward, her green eyes sparkling with genuine curiosity. "What's been going on in your world?" For a moment I hesitated, unsure of how much to share. But something about Emma's presence felt safe, and I found myself opening up in ways I hadn't with anyone else. "It's been a roller coaster," I admitted, recounting the broad strokes of my journey: the betrayal, the divorce, the slow process of rebuilding. But I'm in a better place now. I've learned a lot about myself, about what I want and what I deserve. Emma listened intently, her expression soft and empathetic. "You've been through a lot," she said quietly, "but you've come out of it stronger. That's something to be proud of." Her words stayed with me long after our coffee cups were empty and we'd said our goodbyes. Over the next few weeks, we began to see more of each other, sharing meals, going for hikes, even just sitting on the porch with Scout. Our friendship felt effortless, a natural extension of who we'd been years ago. But as time went on, I began to notice a shift. The way Emma's laughter lingered in the air, the way her hand brushed mine during casual moments, the way her gaze softened when she looked at me. It was subtle, but it was there, a growing connection that went beyond friendship. One evening, as we sat on my porch watching the sun dip below the horizon, Emma turned to me, her expression thoughtful. "David," she began, her voice steady, but laced with vulnerability, Can I say something? Of course, I replied, my heart suddenly beating a little faster. I know you've been through so much and I don't want to complicate things for you, she said, her eyes searching mine, but I can't ignore how I feel anymore. Being with you, spending time with you, it feels right. And I think there might be something more here. Her words hung in the air, heavy with meaning. For a moment I was speechless, caught between surprise and the undeniable truth that I'd been feeling the same way. I feel it too, I admitted, my voice barely above a whisper. But I've been afraid of rushing into something, of making the same mistakes. Emma reached for my hand, her touch grounding me. We don't have to rush, she said softly. We can take it one day at a time. I just wanted you to know where I stand. In that moment, I felt a sense of clarity I hadn't experienced in years. Emma wasn't Clara. She wasn't a ghost of my past or a reminder of my pain. She was a light, a beacon of hope in a life that had once felt so dark. As the sun disappeared, below the horizon, painting the sky in hues of pink and gold, I squeezed her hand and smiled. One day at a time, I agreed. And so a new chapter began, not one defined by betrayal or heartbreak, but by hope, healing, and the possibility of something beautiful. Life with Emma became a journey of rediscovery, not just of love, but of purpose, joy, and identity. Together, we created a world where laughter was frequent, trust was sacred, and dreams weren't just aspirations, but plans we worked on together. It wasn't always perfect, of course. No relationship is. But the imperfections were what made it real. Months turned into a year, and our lives became beautifully intertwined. Emma's patience and kindness brought out a side of me I hadn't seen in years. She had a way of making me believe in myself again, reminding me that the scars of my past didn't define me. They were simply a testament to what I had overcome. One crisp autumn evening, as the sun dipped below the horizon and painted the sky in hues of amber and crimson, I decided to take a step I hadn't thought I'd ever take again. Emma and I had been strolling through the park, the golden leaves crunching beneath our feet. She looked radiant, her cheeks flushed from the cool air, her laughter ringing out like music. As we approached a quiet spot by the lake, I took her hand and stopped. She turned to me, her brows furrowing slightly in curiosity. "David?" she asked, her voice tinged with amusement. "Why are you looking at me like that?" I reached into my coat pocket, pulling out a small velvet box. Her eyes widened, her hand flying to her mouth. "Emma," I began, my voice steady, but my heart racing. "You walked into my life when I was at my lowest, and you showed me that it was possible to find happiness again. You didn't just mend my broken heart. You helped me rebuild it piece by piece. You're my partner, my confidant, my everything. I can't imagine a life without you." I opened the box, revealing a simple yet elegant ring. "Will you marry me?" Tears welled in her eyes as she nodded, her hands trembling. "Yes," she whispered, her voice choked with emotion. "1,000 times yes." I slipped the ring onto her finger, and she threw her arms around me, holding me tightly as we both laughed and cried. It was a moment of pure joy, a promise of a future built on love, respect, and shared dreams. The months that followed were a whirlwind of wedding preparations. We kept things simple and intimate, inviting only our closest friends and family. Emma's parents were thrilled, and even my estranged brother, with whom I'd reconnected, came to offer his support. The wedding day itself was magical, a small ceremony in a sunlit meadow surrounded by wildflowers. Emma walked down the aisle in a flowing ivory gown, her hair adorned with delicate blossoms. She was breathtaking, and as she reached me, I felt an overwhelming sense of gratitude. When it was time for the vows, Emma spoke first. Her words were heartfelt, filled with promises of partnership, trust, and unwavering love. By the time she finished, there wasn't a dry eye in the audience. When it was my turn, I took her hands in mine and said, "Emma, you've taught me that love isn't about perfection. It's about showing up day after day for the good and the bad. You've shown me what it means to be truly seen, truly valued. I promise to honor you, to support you, and to love you with all that I am, for all the days of my life." The officiant pronounced us husband and wife, and as we shared our first kiss as a married couple, the crowd erupted into cheers. That night, as we danced under a canopy of stars, I felt an overwhelming sense of peace. The road to this moment hadn't been easy. It had been marked by pain, betrayal, and heartbreak. But standing there with Emma in my arms, I realized that every step of the journey had led me to her. Our story wasn't just about healing from the past. It was about building a future, a life filled with love, laughter, and the kind of partnership I had once believed was out of reach. And as we swayed to the music, I whispered in her ear, "This is only the beginning." She smiled, her eyes shining with love. "I know," she said, "and I can't wait to see what comes next." In the weeks that followed our wedding, life took on a rhythm of quiet, contented joy. Emma and I moved into a cozy cottage just outside the city, a place where the world seemed to slow down, where mornings were filled with the scent of freshly brewed coffee and evenings with the crackle of a fire in the hearth. But life, as it always does, had its twists and turns. Shortly after settling into our new home, Emma received a phone call that would alter the course of our lives. Her former mentor, a respected academic, had offered her an opportunity to co-author a book, a chance to solidify her career and share her brilliance with the world. The catch? It would require a year of frequent travel and long hours of research. When she shared the news, her excitement was palpable, but so was her hesitation. "David," she said one evening, as we sat on the porch watching the sunset, "I don't want to take this opportunity if it means being away from you. We've just started our life together, and I don't want to jeopardize that." I took her hands in mine and looked into her eyes. "Emma, this is your dream. You've worked so hard to get here, and I won't let you hold yourself back because of me. We'll make it work, whatever it takes. I'm with you, always." Her smile was one of relief and gratitude, and in that moment, I knew we were ready to face whatever challenges came our way. The next year tested us in ways we hadn't anticipated. There were long nights apart, missed calls due to time differences, and moments of doubt and longing. But we leaned on each other, finding ways to stay connected despite the distance. We wrote letters, real, handwritten letters, pouring our hearts onto paper in a way that texting or video calls could never replicate. Every week, I eagerly awaited her letters, filled with stories of her work, her travels, and her thoughts. And I replied with my own, sharing snippets of my days and reminding her how much she was loved. During her rare visits home, we cherished every moment together. We cooked elaborate meals, took long walks in the woods, and talked late into the night about everything and nothing. Those moments, though brief, were a balm for the ache of distance. When the year finally came to an end, Emma returned home for good. Her book was a success, earning her accolades and opportunities beyond her wildest dreams. But more than that, it reaffirmed the strength of our relationship. "I couldn't have done this without you," she said one evening as we sat by the fire, her head resting on my shoulder. "Your faith in me, your patience, it means everything." "You would have done it regardless," I replied, brushing a strand of hair from her face. "But I'm glad I got to be part of the journey." Life settled into a new rhythm after that, a balance of work, love, and shared adventures. Emma's career flourished, and I found fulfillment in mine. but we always made time for each other. We celebrated small victories, supported each other through challenges, and continued to grow as individuals and as a couple. As the years passed, our love deepened, shaped by the trials we had faced and the dreams we had pursued together. We built a life filled with laughter, warmth, and the quiet joy of knowing we had found in each other something rare and beautiful. One day, as we sat on the porch of our cottage, watching the sun dip below the horizon, Emma turned to me with a smile. "Do you ever think about how far we've come?" she asked. I nodded, taking her hand in mine. "Every day, and I wouldn't change a thing." She leaned her head against my shoulder, and we sat in comfortable silence, the world around, us bathed in the soft glow of twilight. It was a moment of peace, a reminder that while life would always have its ups and downs, we had built something strong and enduring, something worth fighting for. And as the stars began to appear in the night sky, I whispered, "This is our story, Emma, and I can't wait to see where it takes us next." Her smile was radiant, her eyes filled with love. "Neither can I," she replied. "Neither can I." The seasons turned, and life unfolded in its quiet, steady rhythm. Emma and I grew closer with each passing day. Our bond deepened by the challenges we had faced and the dreams we continued to nurture. The memories of our trials, once sharp and bitter, softened into stories that we shared over late-night conversations and long walks. They became part of our shared history, the foundation of a love that had been tested and proven resilient. One crisp autumn afternoon, we sat in the garden, the golden leaves swirling around us as the wind carried the scent of earth and wood smoke. Emma cradled a cup of tea in her hands, her eyes sparkling as she gazed at the landscape. "David," she said softly, "have you ever thought about what's next for us?" I glanced at her, curious. "What do you mean?" She hesitated, a small smile playing on her lips. "I mean, expanding our family, starting a new chapter." The thought took me by surprise, though not unpleasantly. I set my book aside and turned to her, studying her expression. "Are you saying you're ready for that?" She nodded, her cheeks flushing with a mix of excitement and nervousness. "I think I am. We've built such a beautiful life together, and I can't help but imagine what it would be like to share that with a child." Her words hung in the air, filled with possibility. I reached out, taking her hand in mine. "Emma, if that's what you want, if that's what we want, then I'm ready too. We'll figure it out, like we always do." Her smile widened, and she leaned in to kiss me, her lips soft and warm against mine. In that moment, I felt a surge of hope and anticipation, as though we were standing at the threshold of something extraordinary. The months that followed were a whirlwind of planning, dreaming, and preparing for the arrival of our first child. Emma threw herself into every detail with her usual passion, from choosing the perfect shade of paint for the nursery to poring over parenting books. I marveled at her determination and joy, her excitement infectious. When the day finally arrived, and we held our newborn daughter in our arms, the world seemed to stand still. She was perfect, with tiny fingers that curled around mine and a cry that filled the room with life. Emma looked at me, her eyes brimming with tears. "She's ours," she whispered, her voice thick with emotion. "Our little miracle." I kissed her forehead, my own tears blurring my vision. "She's perfect, just like her mother." Life took on a new rhythm after that, one filled with late-night feedings, endless diaper changes, and moments of pure, unadulterated joy. Our daughter Lily became the center of our world, her laughter filling our home with light. Watching Emma as a mother was a revelation, her patience, her love, her fierce devotion. She was everything I had always known her to be, and more. As the years passed, our family grew in love and laughter. There were challenges, of course, sleepless nights, moments of doubt, the occasional argument, but they were far outweighed by the happiness we shared. We celebrated milestones together, from Lily's first steps to her first day of school, each moment a testament to the life we had built. One evening, as we sat on the porch watching Lily chase fireflies in the fading light, Emma took my hand in hers. "David," she said softly, "thank you." I turned to her, puzzled. "For what?" "For everything," she replied. "For standing by me when things were hard, for believing in us, for giving me this life. I don't say it enough, but I'm so grateful for you." Her words filled me with a warmth that words could never fully capture. I pulled her close, wrapping my arm around her shoulders. "And I'm grateful for you, Emma, for your strength, your love, and the way you make every day brighter." We sat there in the twilight, our hearts full, the sounds of Lily's laughter echoing around us. It was a moment of peace, a reminder that life's greatest joys often come from the simplest things: a loving family, a shared dream, and the knowledge that, no matter what, we would always have each other. And as the stars began to shimmer in the night sky, I knew that this was the life we had fought for, the love we had built from the ashes of the past. It wasn't perfect, but it was ours. And that was more than enough. As the years rolled on, Lily grew into a vibrant, curious young girl who seemed to embody the best of both Emma and me. Her boundless curiosity reminded me of Emma's tenacity, while her kind, thoughtful nature mirrored my quieter moments. She had a way of bringing light to every room she entered, her laughter infectious and her energy boundless. One summer evening, as we sat around a crackling bonfire in our backyard, Lily turned to me with wide, innocent eyes. "Daddy, can you tell me about when you and Mommy met?" I exchanged a glance with Emma, who smiled softly. It was a question we had anticipated but hadn't yet fully answered. The story of how we met was straightforward enough, but the deeper story, the trials we endured to reach where we were, was one we had chosen to keep until she was older. "Well," I began, leaning back in my chair as Lily leaned forward in anticipation. "It all started at a cafe downtown. I was sitting there with a book, and your mother walked in." As I spoke, I saw Emma watching me, her gaze filled with warmth and a touch of nostalgia. I kept the story light, focusing on the serendipity of our meeting, the way our connection had been instant and undeniable. Lily giggled at the part where I spilled my coffee in an attempt to get Emma's attention, her laughter ringing out in the night air. When I finished, Lily clapped her hands together. "That's such a sweet story. Mommy, did you know Daddy was going to be so clumsy?" Emma laughed, reaching over to ruffle Lily's hair. "Oh, I had my suspicions," she teased, her eyes sparkling, "but I thought it was charming." As the fire crackled and the stars began to dot the sky, I felt a deep sense of contentment. This was what life was about, the quiet moments of connection, the stories that bound us together, and the love that grew stronger with each passing day. But life, as it often does, had a way of testing us. One day, as I was sorting through old boxes in the attic, I stumbled upon a folder tucked away in the corner. Curious, I opened it and was surprised to find a collection of letters and photographs from Emma's past. Most of them were innocent, a snapshot of her college years, notes from friends. But one letter caught my eye. It was from her father, written shortly after the events that had nearly torn us apart. "David, I don't know if you'll ever read this, but I need to put my thoughts to paper. I made mistakes, grave ones, and I see now how my actions contributed to the pain Emma endured. She's my daughter and I love her, but I failed to guide her when she needed me most. Instead, I let my pride and anger cloud my judgment. You're a good man, David, and I've seen the way you fought for her, even when the world seemed to be against you. I hope you can find it in your heart to forgive me, not for my sake, but for hers. She needs you, more than she'll ever admit. Take care of her. Take care of your family. And know that, in my own flawed way, I'm rooting for you. Sincerely, Thomas, I sat there for a long time, the letter in my hands, the words echoing in my mind. It was a reminder of how far we had come, of the battles we had fought, and the scars we carried. Thomas had passed away a few years ago, and while our relationship had remained complicated, this letter brought me a sense of closure. That evening, I shared the letter with Emma. She read it silently, her expression unreadable, before folding it carefully and placing it on the table. "I didn't know he wrote this," she said softly, her voice tinged with emotion. I reached for her hand, squeezing it gently. "He saw what we built, Emma. He saw us, even if he couldn't always say it." Tears filled her eyes, and she nodded, a small smile breaking through. "I hope he did. And I hope he knew that I forgave him, even when it was hard." We sat together in the quiet, the weight of the past mingling with the peace of the present. Life wasn't perfect, but it was real, and it was ours. Together, we would continue to face whatever came our way, armed with love, resilience, and the unshakable bond of our family. The days following her mother's visit were a slow, reluctant unraveling. Emma retreated within herself, as though the weight of 1,000 emotions had suddenly descended upon her, and she didn't know how to bear them all. I watched her. Always. Strong, always composed, now adrift in a sea of turmoil. Every conversation with her seemed like a delicate dance, each word carefully measured, each moment lingering in the air, heavy with unspoken thoughts. Lily noticed it too. The house, once filled with the sound of her laughter, now seemed quiet, even as the bustling of daily life continued. She, ever perceptive, asked one evening as we sat at the dinner table, her eyes narrowed with concern, "Mom, are you okay?" Emma paused, her fork suspended in midair as she looked at Lily. Her lips pressed together for a moment. Then she smiled, a brittle curve of the mouth that didn't quite reach her eyes. "Of course, sweetheart. Just tired. You know how it is." But I could see it. The fissures in her mask, the cracks in her composure that she was desperate to hold together, not just for herself but for Lily. For us. That night, after Lily had gone to bed, Emma and I sat in the quiet of the living room, the weight of her mother's visit still thick in the air between us. I could feel her pulling away, her distance growing as she wrestled with the impossible task of reconciling her past with the present. I reached out, my hand brushing against hers, seeking the connection that had always been our lifeline. She flinched slightly, the movement almost imperceptible, but enough to make my chest tighten with unease. "I don't know what to do, David," she whispered, her voice breaking the silence like a sharp gust of wind. "I don't know if I can forgive her. I don't know if I even want to." I didn't answer right away, letting the question hang between us. The silence felt oppressive, as though the walls themselves were holding their breath, waiting for some sort of resolution. I could feel my own heart racing, torn between the woman I loved and the depth of the betrayal she had endured. "You don't have to forgive her right away," I said finally, my voice soft. "You don't owe her that, but you have to let yourself feel, Emma. You can't keep carrying all of this inside. You need to let it out, whether that means confronting her or just giving yourself permission to be angry." Her shoulders shook as she exhaled sharply. "I've been angry for so long, but I don't know if I can be angry anymore. It feels like a lifetime ago, like all the pain has been buried beneath everything else." I nodded, my gaze not leaving her. "Maybe it's not about anger anymore. Maybe it's about letting go. Not for her, for you." She met my eyes, her own flooded with unshed tears. I don't know if I can, David. I don't know if I even want to. I didn't have the answers. How could I? I wasn't the one who had to carry the weight of a lifetime of disappointment and betrayal. But I knew one thing. She didn't have to face it alone. "We'll figure this out together," I said firmly, squeezing her hand. "I'll be right here with you, whatever you decide." Her eyes softened, the walls she'd built around herself beginning to crumble, just a little. She leaned into me, her head resting on my shoulder, and for a moment, the world outside disappeared. But even as we sat in the quiet comfort of each other's presence, I knew the storm was far from over. Emma's mother's return had stirred up old ghosts, and the damage wasn't something that could be fixed overnight. There would be no easy resolution, no neat conclusion to this chapter of our lives. I didn't know where this journey would take us, but for the first time in a long time, I believed that, no matter how hard it got, we would face it together. Days turned into weeks, and Emma's conversations with her mother became more frequent. Each time, the silence in our house seemed to grow, filled with the weight of unsaid things. Lily had noticed, too. Her bright, questioning eyes would sometimes drift between us, as if searching for answers she wasn't sure how to ask for. I tried to keep things normal, to keep the routine intact for her sake. But even I couldn't ignore the strain that was slowly creeping into every corner of our lives. Every phone call, every strained meeting between Emma and her mother seemed to pull them further apart rather than bringing them together. And yet, through it all, Emma's love for Lily never wavered. No matter how broken she felt inside, no matter the weight of her past, she would never let her daughter feel the same distance that had once existed between her and her own mother. I saw that every time Emma kissed Lily goodnight, every time she listened to her stories, every time she held her close. One afternoon, after one of her long, tearful conversations with her mother, Emma came home, her face drawn. Emma's fingers clutched mine tighter, as if she were drawing strength from the very contact between us. But I could feel the trembling beneath her skin, the uncertainty she was fighting to contain, and it mirrored the chaos swirling within me. She was so accustomed to being strong, always the pillar, always the one others turned to for support. But now, she was the one who needed to lean. And as much as I longed to be the rock she could depend on, I knew that we were both on uncharted ground. I didn't know if I was ready for the depths of the decision she was facing or the toll it might take on us both. Her mother, an ever-present shadow in our lives, a woman whose actions had once broken Emma so completely, now needed to be reckoned with in a different way. The paradox was sharp and cruel. The same woman who had betrayed her, who had hurt her so deeply, now sought redemption in her final days. And Emma, her heart still scarred, had to decide whether to grant it or not. That night, I lay awake long after Emma had drifted off to sleep. Her body curled against mine as she sought comfort in the proximity. Her breaths were slow and even, but I could feel her unease in the tension of her muscles. She was far from peaceful, even in sleep. My mind churned, turning over the fragile threads of everything we had endured and everything that lay ahead. I had always prided myself on being the one who could fix things, who could offer solutions in the face of chaos. But here, now, I was helpless. How could I possibly know what was best for her? How could I understand the weight of her lifelong relationship with her mother, the wounds that had shaped her, the love she still held despite the pain? I pulled the covers up over us, the weight of it all pressing down on my chest, suffocating in its uncertainty. I couldn't change her past, couldn't undo the hurt her mother had caused, but I could be here. I could stay, no matter what. I wasn't going anywhere. The next day, after breakfast, we went for a walk through the park. The sky was a muted gray, the clouds heavy with the promise of rain, but there was a sharpness to the air, a crispness that hinted at something new. Emma walked beside me, her hand still tucked into mine, but I could feel the hesitation in her steps, as if she were walking a fine line between what she had to do and what she was afraid to confront. "I don't know if I can do this, David," she said softly, her voice almost lost beneath the rustling of the wind through the trees. "I don't know if I'm strong enough to forgive her, or if I even want to. Part of me wants to tell her to stay away, to let her live with the consequences of what she's done." I stopped walking and turned to her, cupping her face gently in my hands. "You don't have to forgive her for you, Emma. You don't owe her anything. But maybe, just maybe, this is about giving yourself peace. Forgiveness isn't about her, it's about you. And Lily. You can't carry the weight of this forever." Her lips trembled as she closed her eyes, as though she were trying to hold back a wave of emotions that threatened to overwhelm her. "But how do I forgive her when she's hurt me so much, when she's hurt us?" I could feel her pain as if it were my own. I understood that the depth of the betrayal didn't simply vanish with time. But I also knew that there was a difference between carrying the burden of anger and allowing oneself to heal. Forgiveness wasn't about forgetting. It was about releasing the grip of resentment that poisoned the soul. "I don't have the answer, Emma," I admitted softly. "But I think forgiveness is a journey, not something that happens overnight. And it's okay if you don't know how to take that first step yet. But I want you to know that whatever you decide, I'm with you." She opened her eyes then, looking at me as if for the first time in days. There was a flicker of something, maybe hope, maybe vulnerability, that passed between us. "I don't know if I'm ready," she whispered, her voice shaky. "But I'll think about it. For me. For us." We resumed our walk, the sound of our footsteps in sync, though the silence between us remained heavy. There was no immediate answer, no quick resolution. The road ahead would be long and fraught with challenges, but for the first time in weeks, I felt a small spark of light, a glimmer of possibility. That evening, after dinner, Emma received a message from her mother, an invitation to meet. I watched her read it, her fingers trembling slightly as she typed a response. The message was simple, but it carried the weight of so many years of history, so many unsaid words, so much unresolved pain. She set the phone down on the table with a soft exhale, her gaze distant again. I could see the storm brewing behind her eyes, the turbulence that she was trying so hard to control. "I don't know what to say to her, David," she murmured, her voice fragile. The hours passed in a haze, each tick of the clock a reminder of the silence that enveloped the house in Emma's absence. I found myself pacing, my thoughts spiraling in all directions, wondering what she was saying, what her mother was saying, in response, and whether the weight of it all would finally be enough to push her into a decision she wasn't yet ready to make. I sat in the living room, feeling the emptiness of the space around me, the quiet that now felt heavy, like it was pressing in from all sides. I tried to occupy myself with small tasks, folding laundry, checking emails, organizing things that had no real urgency, but none of it could fill the void I felt in my chest. What if she doesn't come back the same? That thought lingered, uninvited, but impossible to ignore. It was a fear I hadn't allowed myself to fully face until now. What if Emma went to see her mother, and in that moment of raw confrontation, something shifted permanently between them? What if the pain was too much, the wounds too deep to ever be fully healed? I pulled my phone from my pocket, checking for any messages, but there was nothing. Not yet. It was still too soon. Just as the first hints of dusk began to settle in, the door opened. My heart skipped a beat, and I stood abruptly, rushing toward the entrance. The moment she stepped inside, I knew. Her eyes were red, faint, streaks of mascara running down her face, her cheeks still flushed from whatever emotions had coursed through her during the meeting. She hadn't spoken a word yet, and I could tell she was carrying something heavy in her expression. Something she was grappling with and not quite ready to articulate. I reached out, brushing a strand of hair from her face, my touch gentle, offering silent comfort. "Emma, what happened?" I asked softly, but the words felt too small, too fragile in the face of what she had just endured. Her lips parted, but nothing came out at first. She looked down at her feet, almost as if the weight of the world was too much to bear in that moment. I wanted to pull her into my arms, to hold her tight and shield her from whatever pain she was feeling, but I stayed still, waiting for her to take the first step. Finally, she let out a shaky breath, her voice thick with emotion. "I saw her, David. I saw her, and I didn't know what to say. I didn't know if I should say anything at all." I didn't speak. I just waited, holding her gaze as she struggled with the rawness of it all. "She said she was sorry, David," she whispered, her words barely audible. But her apologies didn't feel real. It was like she was just trying to undo all the damage to make it go away. And I don't know if I can just pretend that it's okay. Her hands trembled, and she clasped them together tightly, trying to steady herself. She told me that she was afraid of losing me, that she was afraid of dying alone. And I don't know if I can forgive her for that, because all these years I've been alone in this, in my hurt. But I'm so angry. I'm so angry at her for making me feel like I wasn't enough. Her words cut through the stillness of the room, and I felt the rawness of her pain seeping into the air between us. The space that had once felt like our sanctuary now felt suffocating. I could feel my own emotions rising, compassion, frustration, love. But I knew this wasn't my moment to fix things. This was her battle, her decision, and all I could do was stand beside her. "I understand," I said quietly, my voice steady. "But you don't have to make any decisions now. You don't have to forgive her today. You don't have to do anything until you're ready." Emma nodded slowly, her gaze unfocused as she processed the weight of the confrontation. "I don't know what's next, David. I don't know if I'll ever be ready to let her back in. But I also don't know if I can keep living with this weight. It's like I've been carrying this thing for so long, and I don't know how to put it down." I moved closer, my hand resting gently on her arm. "You don't have to carry it alone anymore. Whatever you decide, I'm with you. We'll figure it out together, one step at a time." She closed her eyes, a few stray tears slipping down her cheeks, but this time, there was something almost freeing about them, like she was releasing the burden, even if just for a moment. "I don't know what she wants from me, David. What do I owe her after everything? After the way she's treated me?" "You owe her nothing, Emma," I said, my voice firm. "You owe yourself everything. Your peace, your happiness, your healing. If you choose to forgive her, that's because you've found a way to free yourself, not because she asked for it." Her gaze met mine then, and for the first time in what felt like forever, there was something softer in her eyes, something like clarity, or maybe just the beginnings of it. The days that followed felt suspended, as though time itself had slowed in deference to the quiet turbulence that simmered beneath the surface of our lives. Emma was in the midst of something profound, something that I couldn't fully understand, no matter how deeply I tried to empathize. She was wrestling with herself, the dual forces of love and betrayal, of a mother who had failed her and a marriage she feared to fracture completely. We navigated the house in a silence that wasn't uncomfortable but heavy, like we both instinctively knew there were things left unsaid, things too fragile to voice in a world that already felt so full of unspoken tension. The morning sun would rise, casting long shadows across the living room, and still, we would find ourselves here, still trying to make sense of everything. I watched her, sometimes from the corner of my eye, as she sat by the window, her gaze drifting out toward the street, lost in thought. I wanted to ask her what she was thinking, if the weight of her decision was starting to lift, or if it was only growing heavier. But I didn't push. I had learned that some things had to be felt, not fixed. One evening, a week after the confrontation with her mother, Emma came to me while I was in the kitchen, making a quiet dinner. Her presence behind me was like a soft breath, the kind that speaks of unspoken thoughts. I turned around, and for the first time in what felt like an eternity, I saw something different in her eyes. It wasn't the anger, nor the confusion, but something that resembled resolve. "I went back," she said simply, her voice steady, but with a quiet edge. "To see her. I needed to. I needed to know. If I could even look at her again." I felt my chest tighten. I didn't ask why she had gone back to her mother because I knew. I knew she needed that last thread of closure, that final moment, to look her mother in the eye and make sense of the years of pain, of neglect, of betrayal. I nodded silently, waiting for her to continue. "She cried," Emma said, her eyes looking distant as she spoke, almost like she was observing herself from a distance. "She told me that she was sorry, that she never wanted to hurt me. But I don't know if I can believe her anymore, David." I could hear the resignation in her voice, the quiet acceptance of what her mother had done, but also a realization that forgiveness wasn't something to be given freely, especially not when it came wrapped in years of unhealed wounds. "I don't think I can let her back in. Not like before," Emma added softly, and I felt a quiet surge of relief within me. It wasn't a happy resolution. There was still so much pain in her words, so much sorrow, but it was the beginning of something. A decision had been made. I moved closer to her, taking her hand in mine, squeezing it gently. "You don't have to forgive her, Emma. Not yet. Not unless you're ready. And you don't have to let her back in. Not if it's too much to ask of you." She let out a long breath, her shoulders relaxing for the first time in days. "I know," she whispered. "But it's hard. I want to feel like I can forgive her. I want to let go of this weight. But right now, it feels like I'm choosing between healing myself and healing our relationship. I just don't know if I can do both." I pulled her into an embrace, my arms wrapped around her tightly as I whispered against her hair. "It's okay not to have the answers right now. All I want is for you to feel like you're not alone in this." She clung to me, her arms folding around me as if I could somehow hold her together, piece by piece. For a moment, it felt like everything had stopped, the weight of the world suspended in that one embrace. I could feel the warmth of her body, the steadiness of her breath against my chest, and for the first time in weeks, I could breathe without that crushing weight in my lungs. "I don't know if I'll ever forgive her, David," Emma said, her voice muffled by my shirt. "But I do know that I have to find my way forward, even if that means leaving her behind for now." I nodded, my hands moving slowly up and down her back, offering the comfort she needed without saying another word. There was no need for more words. In this moment, the silence between us spoke louder than any reassurance I could offer. And then, as if a weight had lifted slightly from her heart, Emma pulled away, her gaze meeting mine with a newfound strength. "I'm ready," she said softly. "I'm ready to move forward, David. No matter how hard it is, I'm ready to take the next step." There was something in her voice, something that told me this wasn't just about her mother or about our marriage, but about her reclaiming herself, her own power. And though the path ahead was uncertain, though the ghosts of her past would always linger in some form, there was a clarity in her eyes now, a sense of ownership over her own story, her own decisions. The days following Emma's decision were filled with a heavy stillness, the kind that presses on your chest and makes it hard to breathe. Our lives, once intertwined with trust and a shared future, now felt like fragile threads, each tugged by the weight of our choices. Yet, amidst the chaos of it all, I found myself torn between two desires that gnawed at me, one for healing, and the other, darker, for revenge. It wasn't a clean feeling, not something easily categorized into righteous anger or justified betrayal. No, this desire for revenge was messy, primal. It spoke to something deep inside me, something jagged and raw. I kept seeing her face, the face of the woman who had deceived me, who had broken the unspoken bond we once shared. Every glance in her direction brought that sting back. Every whisper of a memory was like a blade turning in my gut. Emma's betrayal had been one thing, but now, the betrayal felt like it had gone beyond her alone. It was her parents who had exposed her, her mother who had chosen a side, and in a twisted way, her family had added their weight to the injustice. She had lied, yes, but she was not the only one who had broken something sacred. I could feel the simmering tension in me, bubbling just beneath the surface, threatening to spill over. The house we shared was no longer a home. It was a prison of memories, each one tainted by a lingering doubt or an unspoken accusation. We moved through, it as if on autopilot, her retreating into herself and me, contemplating what to do next. The irony of it all settled over me one evening as I sat alone in the living room. Emma was out, visiting a friend, or so she said. I hadn't asked any questions. The silence stretched long, the ticking of the clock the only sound in the room. And then my mind drifted back to the things I had learned in the days following the exposure of her affair, the information I had gathered in the shadows. I had always known she worked late sometimes, even before the affair. But now those late hours seemed to take on a new meaning. And it wasn't just the late-night meetings that bothered me. It was everything she had said, everything I had missed. All the things I thought were small details, but, in hindsight, were signals. She had always been good at hiding the truth, but now that I knew what lay beneath, it was impossible to unsee. I stood from the couch, pacing in slow, deliberate steps. The tension of the room seemed to thicken, as though the walls themselves were closing in on me. I should be letting it go. I should be trying to heal, to move on. But this need for justice is too loud to ignore. I've been wronged, I thought, clenching my fists by my sides. We've both been wronged. She wants to move forward. But how can we, when there's no accountability for what she's done? The thoughts circled in my mind, relentless, like a predator waiting to strike. The truth was, part of me wanted to lash out, not just at Emma, but at everyone who had enabled this destruction. Her mother, the coworker. They had all played their parts in this brokenness, and I wasn't sure I could forgive them all. How could I? I pulled out my phone, the screen glowing in the dim light, and the realization struck me suddenly. Hard. I had the power to expose the affair further. Not just for Emma, but for everyone. Her parents, the co-workers, the hidden messages, the lies, they were all still there, and they could all be brought to light. I paused. No, I thought, I won't stoop to their level. But even as I thought it, my fingers hovered over the screen, the temptation to right the wrongs too great to ignore. And just as quickly, my thoughts shifted. What would it feel like to see her face when the truth came crashing down? It would be satisfying, wouldn't it? To watch her unravel in the same way she had caused my world to unravel. To expose everything, to let everyone see the lies and deceit that she had hidden behind closed doors. To make her understand the pain she had caused, to make her feel it in a way that left no room for excuses. I stood frozen for a moment longer, the weight of my own thoughts pressing down on me. My breath came quick, and a tremor ran through. my fingers as I set the phone back on the table, deciding, at least for the moment, not to move forward with my plan. But it didn't stop there. The need for revenge was still there, simmering beneath my skin, a fire I wasn't sure I could extinguish. Each passing day, I grew more resentful. Emma would talk to me about moving forward, about rebuilding what we had, but I couldn't shake the feeling that there was no going back. How could there be? How could anything be the same when the very foundation of our relationship had been shattered? When Emma returned later that evening, I looked at her with a mixture of exhaustion and determination. She didn't seem to notice the subtle change in my demeanor, but I could feel it deep inside. My resolve had shifted. The days bled together into an endless gray blur. My life, once full of routine and shared moments, had morphed into something unrecognizable. It wasn't the sadness that weighed on me most. It was the anger. The rage simmered beneath my skin, like a slow-burning ember threatening to ignite at the slightest provocation. Each time I looked at Emma, I saw her betrayal. Each word she spoke, each apology, only deepened the chasm between us. And deep within me, the need for revenge began to take shape, not as an impulsive, reckless outburst, but as something deliberate, methodical, and all-encompassing. I wasn't a man given to rash decisions. I didn't want to destroy everything in a fiery explosion of emotion. No, I wanted something far more calculated. I wanted her to feel every ounce of the hurt she had caused, to experience the slow unraveling of her own life, just as she had done to mine. And for that, I had to be careful. I had to be smart. I started by observing, watching, waiting, cataloging everything she did, every movement, every conversation. It wasn't about keeping tabs on her. I didn't need to follow her around or check her phone. It was about understanding the subtle patterns of her behavior, the cracks in the perfect mask she had worn for so long. I knew she would try to move on, to pretend like everything was fine, like we could just brush the affair under the rug. But I wasn't going to let her do that. Not when I knew the truth. I began taking notes, little things that didn't seem important to anyone else. But that spoke volumes to me. The way her tone would shift when she spoke of certain people, the way she started spending more time on her phone when she thought I wasn't looking. She had become paranoid. I could see it in her eyes when I caught her glancing at me with that guarded expression. She was waiting for the moment I would confront her, the moment I would bring it all to light, and I was going to make her wait. She needed to feel that uncertainty, that fear, just as I had. But it wasn't just her I was planning for. Her coworker, the man who had been the catalyst of this entire mess, also needed to be part of the equation. I didn't know him well, but I knew enough about him to understand that he was a weak link in the chain. He was arrogant, smug, believing that his charm and confidence would shield him from the consequences of his actions. I would expose him too, make him feel the shame, the humiliation of having his affair come crashing down in front of everyone. But I would do it quietly, piece by piece. It wasn't about shouting it from the rooftops. It was about planting seeds of doubt, watching them grow, and letting them destroy him from the inside out. I began to gather information, details about his life that could be used against him, public records, social media posts, anything that could shine a light on his character. I didn't need to expose anything criminal. Just a few carefully chosen words, a few hints dropped here and there, and his reputation would crumble like sand beneath the tide. He would see how easily his life could be torn apart, how everything he held dear could slip away in an instant. The hardest part was keeping my distance from Emma. She knew something was different, of course. I wasn't the same man I had been when she first confessed. My responses to her were colder, more calculated. I listened, but I didn't hear her. I nodded, but I didn't agree. And she began to notice the growing wall between us. "David," she said one evening, sitting down across from me in the dim light of the living room. "We need to talk." Her voice was soft, almost pleading, but I could see the desperation in her eyes. She knew that I was slipping away, and it terrified her. She wanted me to forgive her, to let go of the past and move forward. But I couldn't. Not yet. "What is it?" I asked, my voice flat, emotionless. She hesitated, as if weighing her words. "I know this is hard for you, for both of us, but I'm trying. I'm trying to make things right. I want to fix this. Can't we just start over?" Start over. The words felt like acid on my tongue. The very idea that we could start over as if nothing had happened was laughable. How could she even ask that of me? How could she not see the depth of the devastation she had caused? But I kept my face neutral. I had learned to hide my emotions, to keep them locked away. "I don't know, Emma," I said quietly. "I don't know if that's possible." I watched her face fall, the flicker of guilt crossing her features. But she quickly masked it, plastering on a hopeful smile. "Please, David. I'll do anything. Just give me a chance." Her words were hollow to me now. I knew her desperation, but I also knew that no amount of pleading would erase what had been done. She couldn't fix this. She couldn't undo the damage, but I wasn't going to give her an easy out.